In this Larabit, you'll learn some of the core infrastructure, so to speak, for any collection component. Now, if I were to write my first test, we might say something like it wraps an array of items or something like that. So yeah, we're going to build up a collection class here, and maybe we'll have a make method where we feed it an array of items. And those items will be super simple right now, 1, 2, and 3. Now, what we might do here is assert that when we create this collection, it should currently have 3 items. Let's give it a run, and of course it fails because we haven't yet created that collection class. All right, let's do it now. Create a class, we'll put this within an app namespace, and that will be located in our source directory. Okay, so now if I come back, even though I've imported that class, it's probably not going to work, right? Yeah, it still can't find the class. And that's because I have a brand new project here, and I haven't told it about PSR4 autoloading. So let's do that now. Autoloading for this project will use PSR4, and we gave it an app namespace, and that will be located in the source directory. Okay, so now let's refresh our changes doing composer dump autoload. And with any luck, if I run it again, we will change the error, and we did. Now it doesn't have a make method. All right, let's do that now. Call make, let's hide the sidebar, and this will expect an array of items. Okay, now if I run it again, we've changed the error. Assert count must be countable or iterable, but right now we are returning nothing. So why don't we do this? Let's initialize collection and pass through the items. And then I will add a constructor here that accepts those items. So make is basically a static constructor. And why don't we do PHP 8 assignment here? All right, give that a reformat, run it again, and let's see how we're doing. It still doesn't work. So we've returned an instance of collection, but a class by itself is not countable. And yet, anytime you've used a collection in your own projects, whether it's Laravel's collection component or anything else, this is a core feature they all offer. Okay, they allow for that by implementing a PHP interface called Countable. And this interface has one method, count. So when you implement this interface, we are instructing PHP how to effectively count this object. All right, well in this case, we would count the number of underlying items, wouldn't we? So why don't we return count this items and give it a run. And it passes. Okay, so a basic thing, but again, this is a core piece of infrastructure for a collection. Let's do another one. What about, and I'm going to copy this, we should expect this collection to behave almost as if it was an array. So why don't we say it mimics an array? If I were to create a collection here, let's bring this back like this, could I do something like this, collection 0, and that should give me 1. All right, let's see if we can make it work. Assert equals 1, the first item of the collection. But again, we know that's not going to work. We're dealing with an object here, not an array. And yet, again, for any collection component you've used in the past, they all support this. So we give it a run, and it fails. Cannot use object of type array. Okay, let's make it work. We're going to implement another PHP interface called ArrayAccess. This one includes a handful of methods you need to implement. And it looks a little confusing. Offset exists, offset get, offset set, and offset unset. But it's really not so confusing. And in fact, it's pretty boilerplate code. You could even create a code snippet and reuse it. But I'll show you from scratch. Offset exists basically tells us if the item exists. So if I did something like this, how do we know if that offset exists? Well, we'd use isSet, right? Look in the items array for that specific key. And that's basically what offset is. It's the key. And we're going to return the result of that. Next, offset get would be, well, how do I access collection 4? What exactly happens when I do that? Well, we want to return this item's offset. So we're basically teaching this object how to behave like an array. Now, offset set requires a little bit more. So this would be if I said collection 5 equals something else, how do we make that work? Okay, well, we could say this item's offset equals value, but what about the situations where offset is null? Or in other words, what if you did something like that? Well, if we don't pass anything there, offset is null, and this would fail. So what we do in these cases, and again, this is such boilerplate code for all implementations, you would say something like, well, if offset is null, then let's just push to it like you normally would. Otherwise, we will push to it, but explicitly provide the key. And this is what we get. Finally, for unset, this would be for removing an item. Let's just defer to this item's offset. All right, let's come back to our test. We give it a run, and it works. Cool. So if you want to be super specific, you could repeat this. I don't think we really need to, but if it makes you feel better, this would work. All right, so now we have two pieces of infrastructure, implementing Countable and then ArrayAccess. The next piece of the puzzle would, of course, be iteration. So let's duplicate this, and we'll say it can be looped over or iterated. So to test this out, why don't we, well, loop over it. For each collection as item, and we'll say this assert equals, and we'll need the index. So let's do this. This assert equals items index, and then compare that against the item itself. Yeah, this would be one way to do it. There's another more practical way, which is simply to make sure that we implement the appropriate interface. But this would be fine. Let's get it to work. So we run it, and you get a confusing one here. The test did not perform any assertions, even though we have one right here. Why do you think that is? And of course, the answer is, well, again, PHP doesn't know how to loop over this collection. Or in other words, it doesn't know that what we actually want is to iterate over the underlying items here. So that brings us to the third piece of infrastructure, iterator aggregate. And this should have one method stub, getIterator. So again, in all of these cases, we're teaching the object how to behave as if it were an array, or as if it were countable, or as if it could be iterated. In this case, it wants us to know, okay, well, what's the iterator? And we'll return a new array iterator. And what are we iterating over? The underlying items. So cross your fingers, we give it a run, and now that returns green. So yeah, like I said, another option would be to simply assert that the collection implements that interface. So assert instance of iterator aggregate, the collection. And if we give that a run, it will pass as well. And there you have it. We now have three core pieces of infrastructure that any collection component worth its salt needs to provide and implement. And now at this point, you could begin adding your own methods. For example, map or filter, the sorts of things you get for free if you use Laravel. But otherwise, if you don't want to pull that in or you want to write your own implementation, this is what you might expect to write on your own. All right, I hope you learned a bit.